We're going to give everybody a few minutes to join us. We want to make sure that we don't get started too early, but we're not going to get started too late. So we're going to give people a few more minutes. We had a total of 60 some odd that registered, and we've only got about half that. So we want to give everybody just a few minutes to join us, and then we'll get started. And I'm also going to apologize in advance. I have 3 cats and 2 dogs. And if I shut them out of the room, then they'll be making noise to get in. And if I leave them in the room, there's a potential that they'll be barking or cats will be running in front of my computer. So I apologize in advance for pet interruptions. All right. Let's see. What are we up to now? Holly, 38. We'll give it 2 more minutes and then we'll get started. We will take a few breaks, make sure that you have a drink if you need one, but we'll take at least 1 break, if not more, depending on how quickly we move through the slides. Let's see. Right. All right, if you joined us late, if you would please put your the site you're serving at and the whether or not it's your first, second, or third year or fourth with AmeriCorps. All right. Let's see. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. We are recording, so for people who are joining us late, they'll be able to go back and watch the recording. We will make the recording available to you guys and to and the presentation. There are a lot of links in the presentation that Ted is going to share throughout the presentation. If time permits, when we get to the end of the presentation, we'll visit some of the sites that have some potential resources for you guys. As far as questions go, ask questions as we go along. Before I transition to each slide, I'll try to pause for a minute or 2 in case anybody has any questions, but we'll just kind of move through things, and then hopefully if time permits, we'll visit a few of the links that we have provided to you guys for the resources that you can use. And so welcome to our final series on the disaster service training. Oops, I forgot to share my screen. Let me do that real quick. Hold on. You would think after 2 years of doing Zoom meetings, I would be proficient at sharing my screen. All right, let's try this. Oh.
I'm gonna have to join on my phone.
I have to do it on my.
All right, can you guys see the presentation? All right. So as we said, this is our final piece in our disaster service series. Today, we're just going to talk about some things that you can do and where you can go to find some resources. The presentation will be mostly some links rather than disrupting the presentation and trying to go to the links and going back and forth. We're going to go through the presentation, and then hopefully time will permit us to go in and visit some of the links, and we can kind of explore some of the resources that we're sharing with you today. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time, we already covered disaster. Well, we covered 4 parts of the disaster cycle, and we talked a little bit about the types of things we can do, and now we're going to get a little bit more into the information about what things you can do and where you can go to find these resources. Andrew is going to monitor the chat for us, so if you have questions, you can ask them in the chat, or we can pause for questions as we go along, and you can ask your questions by raising your hand or just jumping in with a question. All right, so today we're going to focus on resources, and mostly preparedness resources. And these are resources for trainings, resources for toolkits and other things that you can make and build on your own, but also that you can share with clients and families that you work with. Right, so we talked before about how Kentucky has quite a few emergency management offices. And this is a map of the 10 areas that have the emergency management offices. And if you look at the map, you can see there's a few symbols here. The area manager office is where the actual people who run the emergency management office are located. The armories are very often where a incident command center might be set up, or an emergency operations center might be set up. And those will vary depending on the resources that are available in each area. So for example, Frankfurt, their EOC is at the National Guard, and the entire emergency management office is at the National Guard. So it depends on where they are, but not all of the locations are going to have that same setup. And so some, in the event of a disaster, these green areas may be where they end up setting up an incident command center, depending on the size of their area managers' offices and the emergency management office in each county, or in each area, excuse me. And so this is just a quick informational slide about the individuals who are in the leadership offices at the main branch of emergency management. Kentucky Emergency Management is a state office, and so they have, kind of state leadership, and then the individual centers have their individual leadership. And so we wanted to share with you guys the different areas and their contacts. And so this slide, these next two slides demonstrate what the area is, who the person in charge of that center is, and then the counties that they cover. And Ted, I don't think we can put all of the links here. And so what you do when you go to the emergency management website is you can click on locations, and it'll give you a link to your specific location. But basically, these are your contact people at the emergency management offices. And as you can see, all counties are covered here in these 10 areas. When you go to their website, you may find that they have different, not everybody's going to have exactly the same resources and exactly the same information. And so each area may be a little bit different, but these would be your main contacts. And then once you're on the emergency management site, you can go in and look at the various things that they offer and decide what types of resources are good for you and your interests. All right. So we're about to move on to some next resources and other things. Does anybody have any quick questions about Kentucky Emergency Management offices and the contacts there? All right. So we're going to move on to the some actual resources that you can build on your own and ways that you can get prepared. So our first website that is really important and I think has probably the most resources is ready.gov. And that is the US Disaster Services website. It has resources, a ridiculous number of resources that no one could possibly ever get through all of them. There's so many, but there's some really good resources in here. And so it has everything from the actual information about disasters, like what disasters you might experience, what the effects are, to how to make a plan, making plans for specific types of people. So, you might have individuals with disabilities. You might have seniors that you want to help put plans together with. It has things about how to deal with pets and animals when disasters strike. It has curriculums and resources and technology and things like that that you can share with others. And so if you, for example, are living or are working in a shelter that services people who are unhoused, you might want to put together an emergency plan with the clients that you have there at your shelter. And there would be some toolkits here that would help you do that. So this is probably the most comprehensive site that we're going to share with you. And you can see just a quick example of some of the things that they might supply here. And so here's a list of how to help your family put together an emergency kit. And this one is geared towards kids, but then there are going to be some that are geared toward people with disabilities or people who are seniors. It has different types of interests, so you can kind of explore that. And we don't want to spend too much time going over everything that would be in there because it would take a while. I think the best way to proceed for you guys is to determine what you're interested in. Are you interested in resources for your family? Are you interested in resources for your clients? Are you interested in resources for your community? And then sort of decide from there what you want to focus on, because you could get overwhelmed by the amount of information that is out there. And so even as we put this together for you guys, it's hard to temper it so that it's not overwhelming, because there is so much information out there. And unfortunately, we know disasters happen, and we say to ourselves in the back of our mind, we want to be prepared, but we're not always actually prepared. And so we're hoping through this series, we've kind of helped get you guys in a mindset of preparedness. But the main thing that is always important is that that you're prepared, and then you can start to look at how you help others. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as well as we move through the presentation. And so building an emergency kit. And so part of any emergency plan that you make with your friends and family and neighbors and clients is going to include putting together an emergency kit. And emergency kits, when you go to the different resources that we're going to provide you with today, they're going to have, everybody's list is going to be different in some way. And so this particular list is the very basic. These are the minimum things that you would want in your kit. And so, for example, at least 1 gallon of water per day per person. Well, obviously that's not going to fit in a backpack, right? So you have to think about things that make more sense. So maybe you have a giant tote that you keep your water in, and then some of your other supplies. You can have individual go bags for each person in your family. And so you could get a backpack, and each person gets a flashlight, and each person has their, but not everybody needs a weather radio. So you might have one kit that has items in it that everyone will use, and that you don't need 10 of, or however many people you have in your family or in your household. But you might need some of these things in the kit, in each person's kit. So do you need a first aid kit in everybody's bag? Not necessarily. But everybody should have a flashlight. Everybody should potentially have their own food. That way you can put in things that each individual likes. And so when you talk about putting in food, you're talking about items that don't have to be cooked. And then of course, if people have medications, having backup medications in there. We talked about medications before. Medications are tricky because most times you can't get extra medication. And so I don't know if you guys are like me, but when I'm supposed to take daily medication. I don't always take it. and so I might have some extras from month to month because I forgot to take my medication a day or two. And so you can kind of keep those and hold on to them and then potentially keep them in your kit as your backup medication. And then we also would highly recommend that you have cash in your emergency kit. And the reason for that is if the internet goes down, electricity goes down, it's going to be hard to go to an ATM and, or not hard, but impossible to go to an ATM and get some money. And so it's always good to have a little bit of backup money that you keep in your kit. You know, even your banks. So you might say, well, I'll just go to my bank. Well, maybe your bank isn't open because maybe the staff can't get there because there's a disaster and they can't get to the bank. So they can't open the bank. And if the ATMs are down around town, your bank ATM is going to be down. So it's always a good idea to potentially try to keep some reserve cash on hand in your go bags. The other thing that you should have is clothing and a good pair of shoes in case you have to leave the house. You need to have a backup pair of clothing. One thing that is important to know is that depending on the area that you live in, and we'll get into this a bit more as well, there may be additional things that you put in your emergency kit based on where you live. So you might find that you have, that your area is prone to a disaster, and there might be different things that you want to have in your kit that others may not have. And so there's also the school of thought that, you know, you look at each disaster that can happen in your area and then build your kit according to that. That could potentially be a really large kit, depending on where you are. And so the best thing to do is just have some general basic items in your kit that will be used no matter what situation you're in. And then there's some extra situations that might require specialized things to be in your kit. And we'll go over those here toward the end of the presentation. You know, things like can openers should be on your list. Because if you're going to pack some food, you're likely going to need a hand crank can opener, or you're not going to be able to get that food open. You should also have things like, you know, cell phone chargers. They make solar cell phone chargers, so you can get a cell phone charger and make sure that it's in your bag and charged. Or the ability to charge that. The other thing that you should consider is, do you need books, games, things your kids can do, things like that. I forgot to mention this at the beginning of the presentation, so I'm gonna, since we're talking about building kits now, this is a weather radio. It's got one of the hand cranks. It has charging ports. We're gonna be giving away 2 or 3 of these. I'm not sure exactly how many yet. For those people who fill out the survey, and we may have some other giveaways. And so at the end of the presentation, we're going to have a survey that we're going to ask you guys to fill out. And we'll kind of randomly draw names and potentially give away some weather radios. These are not very expensive. You can actually buy these. And I think you probably can't see it because my screen is blurred. They have, this one has a solar panel on it so that it can be left outside, and the solar can be charged, or the solar panel will charge it. It has a flashlight on it. It has AM, FM capabilities, and then it has the weather stations. And so the other thing that's really cool about this is if it's fully charged, it can also serve as a charger for your phone and other devices. And so it has a USB port in it, so it can serve as a charger for you as well. So if you don't have one, we're going to give away a few of them, but I would recommend having a weather radio, and you can pretty much buy them about anywhere. You can get one on Amazon or. So any questions about kits? And like I said, the links that we provide you are going to have all kinds of different things on the list, and you just have to decide, okay, do I think this is something that I really need, or is my bag big enough to hold all these things? And so, you know, you might have, I personally could see having totes with my things in it, And then, if a disaster strikes, okay, we're going to go in the totes and here's your bag with your things in it. But that depends on what your abilities are. And it should definitely be tailored to each individual.
Carrie, Andrew has his hand raised.
Yes, Andrew.
Yeah, Carrie, I know you've kind of mentioned this already, but just to sort of reinforce what you're saying, it sounds like a lot of the disaster service response is about preparation and planning. I was wondering if you could just talk real briefly about, like what steps should an AmeriCorps member take, or should someone, when they're talking with family members or maybe people who live by themselves or out in the country or something, what steps should they take to start preparing for disasters and to think about, all these different possibilities?
Yeah, so part of making a kit is making a plan. And I think I got the order of the slides crooked or backwards. Making a plan includes making a kit. And part of making a plan is to sit down with your family members or your neighbors. So for example, I have a couple of neighbors in my on my street that I think about all the time. Do they have access to food and things like that? And so you might decide that there are vulnerable people in your area or clients that you work with who could really use some help putting things together and getting ready and prepared for a disaster. And so I think that the best way to do it, and what they tell you in disaster circles is always prepare yourself first, and then you'll be able to help others. And so it's easier for you to go and talk to other people about disaster preparedness if you're prepared yourself. And so sitting down with your family and making a plan, and we'll go over plans here shortly, is the first step. And part of making that plan is to put together a disaster kit. And then once you have taken care of yourself, then you might want to say, do you have some neighbors on your street that you're good friends with, that you would be willing to talk to them and say, hey, my family's been preparing for disaster. I'd love it if our neighbors could prepare for disasters. And so this is what we've been doing, and this is the resources that we used, and we would like to maybe pair up. And so when there's a disaster, after we finish taking care of our families, what are we going to do to help our neighbors? And so I think the best way to start is to get yourself ready and then move on to helping others. And that is what the disaster, currently I'm taking my CERT training again. I took it years ago, back in like 2006 or something. But I am renewing my CERT training. And one of the things that they stress is always make it's me, us, and them. And we'll go over that in just a little bit about how you prepare yourself, how you help yourself, and then how you help others. And so we'll get into that a little bit more. And then Andrew, if I haven't answered that question by the time we get there, let me know and we'll talk about it a little bit more. Some other things that are really important to be in your disaster kit are your important records or documents. And there's a saying in legal circles, if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. And so a paper trail is really critical during and after a disaster. So without critical documents, you might not be able to get your insurance claims. You may not be able to regain access to your home after an evacuation. So if you don't have things that demonstrate that that's your home that's over there, or that this is where you live and this is the street you live on, you may not be able to get back to your home if you had to evacuate. It also helps in the event of a death, which it would be horrific and terrible, but you want to have the important records that you need somewhere safe. And so it's always best to have them in a fire-resistant, waterproof container. If you have the ability, a safety deposit box with your originals is a really good way to go. It keeps it off-site. But the other thing that you can do, and we highly recommend this as well, is to get yourself a thumb drive, keep your copies of your documents on it, and keep that in your Go kit so that you have, whether you have the paper copies and or, whether you have the paper copies or you have a digital copy, it's always good to have backups of your backups. And so don't rely on having it in just one place. you should want to have it in multiple places. Excuse me 1 second. My dog is trying to chew a blanket and pull it off of things.
While Carrie's stepping away, does anybody have any questions so far? Does anybody thinking back to, the first 2 training sessions that we had where we were talking about the different stages of the disaster cycle, and they have any, just any observations or anything they'd like to know or share with the group?
All right. Okay, so again, these are just some of the important documents: birth certificates, marriage licenses, your passport, or, obviously most of us carry our driver's license on us, social security cards, your car information, wills and things like that. You should always have backup copies of those. The other thing that I really liked on here was the household inventory. And this is really important to have in your kit, because if your house were to be destroyed or damaged severely, you might, it would be helpful if you could say to your insurance company, these are all of the things that were in my home. And it helps make a list of, it helps when you have this list, it helps you when you're trying to get or file an insurance claim, that you can demonstrate that these are the items that you had in your home and that they're now lost because the home was destroyed. And so it's really important, I think, to have those things as well. I encourage people to get renter's insurance. So even if you don't have, even if you don't own your home or you live in an apartment, it's always good to have renter's insurance, because generally with renter's insurance, you also have to turn in a household inventory. And so those are some key points that I think are really important to disaster preparation and what happens afterwards. And part of your recovery process is having all of these things so that you can get things back to normal. All right, so creating emergency plan, everybody should have one. It should include everybody that's in your household, and it shouldn't just be that it involves everyone, but you should get everyone in your household involved. So it's not that you need to say, okay, well, we're going to do this, but you don't share it with everyone. So when you sit down to make your plan, all the family members should be around the table, and everybody should be discussing what the plan should look like. The template down here that is in the corner, it's basically just a document, and you just fill it out. You kind of answer these questions. And you want to include everybody in the family, because you also need to consider what everyone's abilities are and how they can help work together during a disaster, but also what their limitations are. So for example, my husband Ted is in a wheelchair, and we know that when we make our emergency plan, that we have to be thinking about how we exit our house. And so there's only so many, we have 3 doors that we can get out of our house in, but only 2 of them are really accessible to him, because our back door has a raised porch and he can't get his wheelchair down that porch. And so you have to think about those types of things when you're making your disaster plan. For example, I know that I have the windows in my living room and my office here are really and maybe the kitchen window are really the only windows that I could get out of if I needed to exit, because they're low enough to the ground that I could crawl out and not injure myself. And so when you make a disaster plan, you need to think about your house and what happens if our main entrance is blocked. Where do we go? What happens if all the doors are blocked? Can we get out the windows? And so it's thinking about these types of things and putting those types of things in your plan that are going to help you be better prepared. And so, like for my daughter, her room, we would say, your room is here. This is the door closest to you. If it's not blocked, you go to this door. If it is blocked, then you go to this door. And the same thing for Ted and I. And so what you want to do is make sure that everybody is involved, that everybody knows what they should do. And there's different types of disasters that you're going to have to prepare for. So is it going to be a disaster in which you're going to have to shelter in place? or is it a disaster in which you're going to have to leave your house because it's no longer safe? And whether that is that there's a flood coming, or a tornado has damaged it so that you have a gaping hole in your roof. Is it, that you're going to be without power and you have someone in your home who relies on emergency medical equipment that requires electricity and you don't have any? So you got to think about, what are the circumstances of your household, and what are the things that a disaster can disrupt that are going to require you to add it as part of your plan. And the best way to do it is to think about what disasters are common in my area. And I will tell you that for most people, Lexington is probably one of the few exceptions, but for a lot of people in Kentucky, flooding is probably one of your number one issues. And so what happens if there is a flood coming? How do you prepare for a disaster if you are somewhere where you could potentially experience flooding? Obviously, tornadoes are another that we should prepare for in Kentucky. And then depending on where you live, you might find additional disasters that are relevant to you. So for example, if you live in or near Madison County, you've got the chemical stockpile emergency. If there were a hazard release there, you guys would maybe have a different plan, but you would also have potentially different items in your kit. And so we'll talk about some of those a little bit later. But the point is that you don't just say, okay, here it says build my emergency kit. This is all the stuff I need to have in my emergency kit. And then here's my plan. You want to make sure that that plan is comprehensive enough that it includes everybody, that it talks about things like let's say that I'm the trained person in my household and I get injured. What are the other people going to do to ensure that our family is able to weather this emergency? And so do we have a backup plan for if I'm not the person that can render aid, or if I'm not the person that is able to go and organize our family? Each person has a job. Do we have a backup plan for that? And so the thing about disaster planning and what's tough about it is you could fall into a rabbit hole with this. And I think what is important is that you start with the basics and that you build from there. And hopefully you don't experience a disaster. The other piece of disaster planning, and this is one of the things that I'm learning quite a bit about as I'm doing my CERT training, is depending on where you live, you may have your city may have a really robust disaster plan. So we're fortunate in Lexington that there's an entire department of people that are helping us prepare for disasters in Lexington. And we don't get flooding here. And so most of the time we're dealing with snowstorms, ice storms, the occasional high winds and potential for tornado, but we don't get as much severe weather here as some other places might get. And we don't live close to any river, so we're not getting a lot of flooding. We probably are going to get more flash flooding type situations. But I know that Lexington is very prepared for all disasters because they have this huge department of people that are helping the community be safe. But you may live in an area that doesn't have a big enough department that they're going to have all of these potential resources available to you. And so your plan may need to be more robust than potentially someone else's plan, just because you already have some things in your town that are beneficial to helping you in deal with a disaster. Your plan should include what to do in case you get separated. What to do, your plan is, I think I said this before, but I'll say it again just in case I didn't. You need a shelter in place part of your plan and an evacuation part of your plan. And then again, making sure that everyone in your household is a part of that plan and has a role to play. Any questions about that?
Just a quick point of information. The links that are located at the lower right-hand corner of the page there are not translating well into the chat. So we'll either include these resources are PDFs. So we'll include them along with the slides when they're made available, or you can reach out directly to any of us and we can get them forwarded to you.
Okay, thank you, Ted. And we'll probably share all these resources, and maybe what I'll try to do between now and when we have the recording ready to share with you guys, I'll try to take a page and just put all the links on one page so that you don't have to go through each slide to find them. All right, so other things about preparedness. And so these are a lot of links here, and I did plan to go through these, but I don't want to go back and forth between opening the links and the presentation. So we're going to look at some of these here at the end of the presentation. But the Red Cross obviously has been doing disaster preparedness for years, and they also have tons of resources. And some of these resources are going to look very similar to the ones that are in ready.gov. And so it's a matter of preference. Some of them may include things that other sites don't include. And so you'll just kind of, like I said, you think about what's important to you and then look for that best resource that fits your needs. So be Red Cross ready. This is just a quick overview of how to prepare for disasters. This is basically your emergency kit. And again, this is what supplies they think you need. And this list is going to be different from potentially a list that you might look at ready.gov. It's going to have some basic things like we talked about before, but it may have additional items on it. And some of the things you may say, well, I don't really think I need that, but I think I need this kind of thing in my emergency kit. And that's what you need to think about is just because it tells you this is all the stuff that you need in it, you may not need that. You may need something else. And so you think about what you need and what your family's needs are, and then build your kit based on that. And then you also need to consider that not everything, so not all of us have the ability to build this, kit that might end up costing me $100 to build because there's so much stuff in it. And so, you think about how you want to build your kit and your ability to do so. And so it might be that you build your kit over time and you start with the very basics. Maybe you get a weather radio, make sure you have all your legal documents because those are easy to copy and you don't necessarily have to have extra money to put that in your kit. When you're cleaning out your closets and you're thinking to yourselves, I have way too many blankets in here. Well, maybe one of those blankets becomes an emergency blanket that you put in your kit. And so thinking about those types of things and building your kit over time is something that I think is really useful. And it could be that you say once a month, I'm going to get something extra for my kit. So I'm going to spend a little bit of money this month to get one extra item for my kit. And whether that is, one of those really great lantern type flashlight things, that might be a little more expensive than your basic flashlight. Or, if you're out and about and you see a sale on batteries, well, I'm going to stock up on batteries because there's a sale this month. Or, I'm going to stock up on some ramen. Or, well, I guess you can't put ramen in your kit because you can't cook it. But whatever your items are, and you think about that, if you're able to build the kit, start with your basics and then build as you go, so that it doesn't become something that is a burden for you to put together. Being informed is just more information about how to be informed about what happens when a disaster strikes. So where do you get your news? What's the best way to find out what's happening? What's the best way to find out what you're supposed to be doing? If you're very interested in training, obviously Red Cross has great CPR and first aid training. Theirs can be costly, but it's excellent. It's an excellent training. I've previously been first aid and CPR certified through the Red Cross, but there are other resources out there that I'm going to share with you guys as well. They have lots of different trainings and certifications that you can take at Red Cross. And then if you're interested in volunteering with the Red Cross, they always have volunteer opportunities. And some of them are not always related to disaster recovery and response, but a lot of them are related to preparedness. And so there's ways that you can get involved in blue sky days that might help you be prepared for those gray skies. If you are ever in need of help, the Red Cross is a place that you can go and get some assistance. So if you do end up being impacted by a disaster, the Red Cross has various resources that you can use and apply for. So for example, they do fire assistance. So if you were to have a fire in your household and you were displaced, they have a program that helps you go get to a hotel and then helps you recover some of the things that you lost. And so there's a couple of different resources that you can use. And then always during disasters, blood is always needed. And so obviously the Red Cross has some information about giving, being a blood donor. And then just little information for those of you who are interested in helping others. They do have, you can donate to the Red Cross. And this is just some information about how you can do that. All right. Any questions about Red Cross? All right. So some other things to know about making a plan. Your plans should involve a couple of things. They need to be relevant to the most common disasters in your area. They need to include communication plans. And so not only how do you communicate with others in your household. So let's say that you didn't charge your phone, or maybe your phone died overnight when a storm blew out the power, and you wake up the next morning and your phone isn't charged. Do you have some of those little two-way radios in your kit that you can use if you get separated? Things like that. And then the other thing that needs to include is who are you going to contact outside of your household to let them know that you're safe, so that other people know that you're safe, because everybody's going to be trying to reach you. Oh, you know, so-and-so had a tornado. I wonder if they're okay. If you're able to call out and you have an individual in your outside your community, it usually helps to have someone outside your community, because depending on the size of your community, if you're hit, there's a potential that others who are in your family that live in the same community might be hit as well. And so do you have someone out of state? Do you have someone out of county that you could send a message to, so that they know that you're okay, and that when other people start trying to call you, everybody knows, hey, so-and-so is my emergency contact, and they know what's going on with us because we've shared it, because we've contacted them. You always need a way to find out what is happening during this disaster. So you don't want to just say, okay, we woke up without power because there was an ice storm. And, you know, I've got somebody in my house that has medical equipment that needs to be charged. Where am I going to go? And can I get out? So you need to have a way to find out what is happening locally or in your area, so that you can decide, am I going to have to shelter in place? And if I'm going to have to shelter in place, what is that going to look like? How am I going to keep us warm? What are we going to do about the fact that we don't have power? What are we going to do about the fact that, you know, a family member needs emergency or medical equipment power? And so is that you have a generator? Is that that you have a person's house that you can go to that isn't going to be impacted, and you can plug in that equipment there? And so you want to just make sure that that you think about all the scenarios that are likely to impact your individual family. Always include your pets in your planning, because it was interesting when I had my CERT training a couple of weeks ago, or one of my CERT training days. They talked about pets, and they talked about how before Katrina, most places would not take pets. And so that's why most people did not leave their homes when Katrina hit, because they knew they didn't have anywhere to go that would take their pets. And since then, since Katrina, more organizations have opened up allowing people to bring their pets, because they know people won't leave they'll keep themselves in harm's way just because they don't want to leave their pets, which isn't a bad thing. But now because of Katrina, we now have a lot of shelters, a lot of city plans have a plan for what you can do with your pets. And so maybe it's not that you can take your pets with you, but that there is a shelter that will let you take your pet there. So whether that is, you know, a vet's office or something like that, there might be a place in your city that will allow you to bring your pet, or a place where you can take your pet so that you know it's safe and you're not having to leave it at your home without food or water or whatever. And we talked before about being very important to include or consider the abilities of everyone in your household, and having multiple escape routes. One of the most important parts is that you practice this plan. So it's not okay, or it doesn't help you to make a plan and then never practice that plan, or never discuss it again, or we wrote the plan and then we put it away. We need to revisit our plans, and much like our kits that we make, we need to revisit those kits and make sure, so we put food in there 6 months ago. Is that food still good? We put water in there. Water should stay, depending on what kind of receptacle it's in. So sometimes water that's in a gallon jug might start to taste bad after a while, and maybe you don't want to use that water anymore. And so it's really important to have a plan, to revisit your plan, but also to check your kits. And they recommend things like doing it when daylight savings time, when you have to set your clocks. That's the time when you check your kits, revisit your plan. It could be when you're changing out your batteries in your smoke detector. It could be that you say, we're going to revisit our plan during the change of season. So today's the first day of spring. We're going to check our plan, and we're going to check our bags and make sure we're ready for spring weather. Or, in the wintertime, are we checking our bags in December or January to see if we have what we need if we were to have a snowstorm? Do we have plenty of blankets? Do we have extra clothes? Do we have boots? Do we have, those types of things? And so you want to make a plan for when you're going to check your plan and when you're going to check your emergency kit to see if it needs to be updated. Changing the batteries. So if you, I wouldn't recommend that you keep your batteries in your flashlights, for example, because if you don't check your bags and your kits every 6 months or whatever that might be, the corrosive battery may destroy those flashlights. And so it's best to keep the battery separated and then put it in there when the disaster occurs. So it's little things like that you need to be mindful of. And then, maybe those, maybe you don't want to store your water in the same place that you're storing your paperwork, because then what happens if the water leaked or something and then your paperwork were destroyed? And so think about those types of things when you're making your plans and your kits. Whether or not that's putting things in baggies or, and then putting those baggies inside of other things. Just think about those types of things as you're planning. So I mentioned this before, the me, us, and them theory. And so when disaster actually strikes, your first priority must always be you as the individual. If you are the person that's leading your family in a disaster, then you need to make sure that you're good. And so you can't help others if you're a victim. And so, make sure that you're good and that you're ready to help others. Also make sure that everyone else in your family is good. And that's where the us comes in. So now that you're good, you're healthy, you're able to get up, go and find your other family members that are in your household and make sure that they're all okay. And so you want to make sure that they don't have any injuries. And we need to make sure everybody gets their go bags together or has their kits. And then we also want to make sure that your property is good. So part of us is your property. So once you determine that everyone in your household is fine, then you need to assess your property, decide if it's safe to stay in that property, if there are parts of the house that are not safe, but potentially others are. Whatever that is, you need to assess it and then decide what you're going to do based on the plan that you made. And so it's really important that you take care of you first, because as you get ready to, if you have to leave your house because it's unsafe or because the disaster calls for evacuation of individuals, then you need to be prepared to go. And so is your house prepared for you to leave? So if your house hasn't been affected yet, so let's say you live in Richmond and maybe the Bluegrass Army Depot had a leak of these chemicals and you have to evacuate. What are you going to do about your house? How are you going to make sure that your house is secure? So making sure that you have things locked, making sure that you have your sets of keys and all these types of things. And so you just need to decide, actually I said that you shouldn't evacuate when there's a chemical spill. You would stay in your house, but if you had a flood and you had to leave your house, for example, you want to make sure that you've secured your house so that it is so that you can return to it. And then if anybody is injured or your house is, that's not supposed to be venerable, that's supposed to be vulnerable. If your house has some issues, you want to try to do what you can to mitigate any further damage while staying safe. And then finally them. And so once you've helped yourself and your family, if you want to go out and you know that you have potential neighbors that could potentially use some help, or you see that neighbors have, a tree has fallen on one of your neighbors' houses, or, some wind has blown off gutters or roof or whatever, you want to make sure that you are going to go out and help those neighbors. And so it's better to stay close to your neighborhood. So one of the things that you want to do is you don't want to necessarily get in your car and drive somewhere, because you don't want to clog up the road. We need emergency crews to be able to get through. And so if you get out there in your vehicle and then you get stuck, then your vehicle is another obstacle that they have to overcome. And so it's always best when you're responding that you respond in your neighborhood and you keep it local. And that's what CERT is all about. It's about community response. And so you stick within your community. Your plan might include having to go out because you have a family member who is more vulnerable and they live somewhere else. And that's okay, but your plan should include, is there someone that can check on them so that I don't have to get out and drive? Again, depending on the type of emergency, it's not always good to just get in your car and go. And so we don't want to contribute to traffic issues. And so you want to try to stay close to your neighbors and in your neighborhood where you can walk and help people. We don't want to become part of the problem that others have to solve. And so when we get out, if we get stuck, and then our car is there and we move it to another neighborhood, we take it off the street so it's not in the way, but is in the way of somebody else. And so it's really best to just think about, as you're planning, what are the things that we should and shouldn't do? And should we plan on just getting in our car and going? Or should we wait and see, are we good to stay in our house? Can we help our neighbors? Can we check on our other family members? Maybe send somebody else who's closer to help them. Often untrained people, when they go out to help others in disasters response, end up hurting themselves. And so we don't want to do that either. And so it's really important that you think about these things. And the big picture would be is if we all prepare ourselves, then hopefully we don't have to worry about everyone else. If we encourage our family members and our friends and our neighbors to be prepared, then when disaster hits, we don't have as many people who are vulnerable. Yes, Andrew.
Carrie, I was just curious, when you're talking about putting together a plan, is this something where everybody should do it like by themselves and they should be doing research, or maybe they could like get together as a group and like come up with a plan? They say like, this is something that everybody needs to have. So we'll come up with one plan that works for like 5 different families or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's always like, I think it's always good to include your neighbors in your planning. Unfortunately, we don't have as many CERT offices and CERT teams in Kentucky as we would like, but you can build your own kind of mini CERT if you talk to your neighbors. And so like, this Memorial Day weekend, if you're out with your neighbors having cookouts and stuff, it's a great time to talk about, hey, I've been learning about disasters and preparing for disasters. You okay, Ted? Okay, sorry, I thought I heard something. And so, I'm having trouble with my internet. Can you guys still hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Okay. All right, I'm getting messages that my internet connection is unstable. So if I cut out, be patient, I'll try to get back to you as quick as I can. But yes, Andrew, you're right. It's best if you can kind of community organize. And that's kind of how CERT started. CERT started as a community, the fire departments in California were dealing with so many disasters that they were just like, we need community response teams. And so they started encouraging people to do CERT. And unfortunately, even though CERT isn't available in every county, you can kind of have your own mini CERT team. And that is that you're learning how to take care of each other in the event of a disaster. and sticking to your neighborhood is really what it's about. Lexington is so large that that we have people, there's probably about 500 people certified in CERT, but not every single neighborhood is connected yet because there's so many people in Lexington. So if you think about the fact that there are 200,000 people living in Lexington and only 500 of them are CERT trained, it's kind of on those CERT people who are CERT trained to talk to their neighbors about how they can also be prepared. And so, you know, one of the things that we do as AmeriCorps members is we educate others and we help and support each other. And so you guys already know how to do this. And so now it's just a matter of taking what we learn here and passing it on to others and helping build some networks. And just remember that when a disaster happens, the very well-trained people are out there first. And we know that they need the space to do the work that they need to do. And we don't want to contribute to that by becoming part of the problem and trying to get out there. And so that's why it's better to stay local and then build your network to move out. So you've taken care of your street. Do you know that there's a neighbor on the street behind you who is elderly and isn't able to move? Can we go check on them? And so it's just kind of building that network and then, you know, making a plan for your me, your us, and your them. And your them is, like Andrew said, trying to see if you can get your neighbors interested in preparation. All right, so this is a good space for a quick break. And so we can take a quick break. I'd say 5 minutes if you need to use the restroom or get a drink. But also I will take any questions that you guys might have. See if I can see the chat. Jared tells us that Red Cross shelters do not allow pets. Yeah, and so the thing with pets is not every shelter is going to allow them. And sometimes it's that you have to separate from your pet. And so sometimes, even though your house may not be safe, you know, the local animal shelter may allow your animal, may open up to allow animals to come. Sometimes the city will determine a location where people will be allowed to bring their pets with them. And so it just depends on your location as to whether or not you'll be able to take your pets, but your plan needs to include that, and you need to research it. So one of the things that I'm going to grab. So as I was saying, I'm doing my CERT training right now, and they gave us these little flyers or brochures, and one of them talks about, if I can find the right one, prepare for emergencies now, information for pet owners. And this one's actually offered by FEMA, so you can go onto FEMA and find out. You can find this same brochure that's, I keep forgetting I'm blurred, so you can't see it, but it's basically what to do with your pets. And it talks about, you know, do you have collars and ID tags for your animals? Do you have another family member who could potentially take your pet while you're having to shelter somewhere that doesn't allow you to take your pets? And so you want to kind of make a plan for what to do with your animals, because again, as I said when we started, I have 3 cats and 2 dogs. I don't want to leave my pets here, and I don't know anybody that's going to take all 5 of my animals. So I may have to divide them up. I may have to have different family members take different pets for me. But we should consider that. Do we have a carrier for our pets to get them out of the house? And so there's different resources out there, and we'll look at a few of them. But I think it's really important to know what your locality will allow in terms of pets. I'm just checking the chat to see if I had anybody else that had any. So some training, so Carla asked about the trainings. Some of the trainings that I indicated are free with Red Cross. Some of them are not. FEMA trainings, almost all FEMA trainings are free. And then there's some other trainings out there that are also free. Disasterready.org has trainings that are free. The kinds of trainings that usually end up not being free are the types of trainings like CPR and first aid. Sometimes you might find that the training is free, but if you want to be certified and get a card, you have to pay for the card. You might find there are some online CPR classes that you can take, and they're free, but you don't get that hands-on experience sometimes. And so it depends on the class. Most of the resources that we shared with you guys, the FEMA classes, I think I've got a slide here in a little bit that has some FEMA stuff on it. They're free. If you live or work in Lexington, you can join CERT and take the CERT classes for free. And if you live in a county that has CERT, and I'll show you where some of those are later. If you have a CERT in your area, CERTs are always free. The thing about CERTs is that they typically, it depends on how they do them, but in Lexington, for example, the CERT training, it's 3 hours, 1 day a week, I think over the course of like 6 weeks. And then you're certified, and it doesn't cost you anything. And so it depends on the resource that you're using. But I am trying to provide some resources, or we are trying to provide some resources that are free. Let's see, I'm trying to think, are there any other questions in the chat? All right. Do they have language assistance? So most of the websites that we gave you guys, the ready.gov, I'm pretty sure Lexington's has it. But when you go to most of the websites, there'll be a languages piece where you can go in and click on a link, and it'll provide the resources in different languages. As far as shelters and things like that go, one of the things that we know is that there are a lot of people that live in our areas that English is not their first language. Unfortunately, so for Lexington, for example, I think there are, somebody mentioned this at our CERT training not too long ago, and I can't remember exactly how many different languages are spoken in Lexington. And obviously not all of those languages are going to be available in every place that you go. And so it's always good to have as part of your plan, hey, I speak this language, I could go and help as a translator in some of these locations. And so you could call the Red Cross, or you could call your local emergency management office and say, by the way, I speak Spanish, or I speak French, or whatever your language is, and I would like to offer my services in case of a disaster. I'm going to come and help you guys translate. But the problem we run into is sometimes there are so many languages that most locations don't have the people on staff that can actually help. And so that's where volunteers come into play. And so if you're looking for a way to volunteer, that's another thing that you can look into is, do you have some language skills? Because those are some vulnerable people in disasters as well. All right, so I said we were going to take a break, and then I kept talking. So I just wanted to know, you guys do a thumbs up, or let me know if you want to keep moving. We don't have a whole lot left. Most of what we're going to talk about is specific disasters and preparedness. The certification for CERT, you can renew it annually, but it's not necessary to do it every year. You can, once you're certified, or once you're a CERT member in Lexington, you stay a CERT member. If you want to go and do refresher courses, you can, but you don't have to recertify on CERT. All right, so we're going to keep moving. Somehow my presentation is not where it's supposed to be. All right. Okay, So a few more resources. We're going to talk a little bit about specifically Kentucky response organizations. And so some places in Kentucky or some organizations in Kentucky that you can tap into if you want to be a part of disaster response. We talked about VOAD before, which is Volunteer Organizations Active in Disaster. They have volunteer opportunities during blue skies and gray skies. Right now, they're still actively meeting to discuss and deal with the tornadoes and trying to help those in need still in Western Kentucky. The thing about VOAD is it's an organization itself, but it's really made up of a bunch of sister organizations. So it's a group of organizations working together. And so when you go to their website, go to the organization. So if you're interested in actually responding to disasters, it's not VOAD that's going to help you. It's the individual organizations that you want to partner with. And so, for example, there's a Baptist ministry, and they do a lot of disaster response. They do, they do chainsaw training. They do mucking and gutting. They're like real. I don't know that they do search and rescue, but they do several things, and you can actually go in and find their link, and you can click on that link and you can find out more about them. And then you can decide whether or not you want to become part of their training. And they actually allow individuals, you don't have to be affiliated in any way with a particular group, but you can join some of these organizations and get trained to be a part of what they do. What I will say about some of these organizations through VOAD is that some of them are religious in nature. And so you just want to be careful about your prohibited activities. And so it's not that you can't be a part of an organization that is a religious-based organization and does response. It's just what activities you agree to do, as I was saying, cat in the way. The things that you're allowing yourself to do during a disaster. So let's say that you join one of these Baptist ministry disaster response groups. Just make sure that they understand that as an AmeriCorps member, you can do the disaster work, but you can't do any religious activities as part of that disaster response. And so just be careful about that. CERT, right now there are 25 counties that have CERT teams. Some of them are colleges, some of them are within your county or city organizations. And the link for CERT will tell you where those 25 counties are. Never, ever, ever self-deploy. Even if you're trained, you don't self-deploy. We talked about the reasons for that. One, if you try to self-deploy and you go out in your car and you get out there and then you can't get to the location because the roads are shut down, or you go to that location and try to help, you don't have a place to stay. So you don't want to just self-deploy and get out there and just do your thing, because if you go out and you self-deploy and you're alone, you're also potentially going to get injured. Who's going to help you? And now you've become part of that problem. And so you always want to be a part of a group, and whether that is a community group like CERT, or whether or not you join one of these VOAD organizations. CERT is designed to be neighborhood response. And so I think that is, if you have one of those in your counties, that's your best way to be a part of disasters. Is to CERT train if you have those abilities. If you don't, and you're very interested in CERT, find other people in your community that are interested in CERT and go to places like your fire, or if you have a college in your town, your fire department, your emergency management office, go to them and say, hey, I've got 20 people in my neighborhood who are interested in CERT. Can we start CERT training in teams? And just sort of help build it if you're really that interested. CERT starts small, and even if you don't have an official CERT, you can be a quasi-CERT in your own community if you are working with your neighbors like we discussed earlier. So I wanted to share some of the preparedness training options. As I said, the FEMA disaster training courses are Almost all of them are free. Some of them are very short. Some of them are very long. So it depends on what your interest is. And again, think about your interest. Look for what you want on these sites. Disasterready.org has everything from personal safety to safety in the Ukraine crisis or the Ukraine crisis. Disaster Ready does a lot of humanitarian stuff. And so you may have an interest in that, you may not. But they have a lot of different things that I think are useful. Like when they talk about personal safety, it's things like, active shooter things and stuff like that. And then we talked about CPR. I showed you guys the Red Cross, American Heart Association, National Safety Council, YMCA of Central Kentucky, and American AED CPR certification. I'm pretty sure this last one is free. And if you search, you can probably find more free resources. Generally, what ends up happening with CPR and first aid is that they offer the trainings for free, but if you want to get a card that shows that you're trained, they make you pay for that card. It just depends. Narcan and naloxone trainings, those are usually offered through your health departments, hospitals, or universities. They're almost always free. It's just a matter of finding who does them in your community. For a while, they were doing mobile naloxone trainings. I'm not sure that they still are. I couldn't find information about it. For those of you who aren't aware, Narcan and naloxone training, that is the overdose medication that is life-saving. And if you get trained, they will usually give you a prescription for a Narcan kit that you can have and keep in case of an emergency. McKenna says, I'm assuming Barren River Health Department in Warren County does naloxone training. I know Fayette County does it as well at the health department. Let's see, 1214. All right. Yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but you've done the naloxone training before, right? What's it like?
It's pretty simple. It's basically just if you guys have ever seen those, it's similar to the training that you get with like EpiPens. It's similar to that. It's pretty easy. We've done it at launch event before. They trained everybody at one event. It didn't take very long. It's been a couple of years since I've done it, and I need to redo it because since the pandemic, I haven't really been getting out much. And so I didn't necessarily use it. So I could probably use a refresher. But it's a pretty basic training, and the health department offers it in most cases. And they don't just talk about how to administer, they talk about why you administer. They tell you a little bit of information about how it works so that you understand it. And they do all of this because they basically give you a prescription for it. And so it's part of the procedure that you understand naloxone, and not just how you administer it, but why you administer it, when you administer it, and things like that. We will, if you guys are interested, let your site supervisors know that you're interested in naloxone training. We have a really good relationship with the public health department at CHFS. And they have done a naloxone training at a launch event before, and I'm sure that we could get them to come back and do it again if we ask them to. So if you guys have an interest in that, let your program directors know, and we'll have them pass that information on to us, and we'll consider how we can maybe provide that at some of our launch events and other things like that.
Yeah, and more generally, if as we're thinking about all of these disaster services trainings that we've experienced so far, whether or not you're attending all three of them or you've watched recordings of them, as you're thinking about what your plan is going to look like, or what your response plan is going to look like in your community, if you and some of your other members think of something that you think would be really helpful, either for your AmeriCorps program or maybe for future AmeriCorps members, be sure to talk to your site supervisors and to your AmeriCorps program directors, because that's how we're going to get more input, and that's how we'll be able to offer better trainings in the future. Right now we're trying to take a little bit of input from you all and try to give you all tools so you can come up with something that works for you in your situations. But we also want to make sure that we're providing opportunities for future AmeriCorps members. And you talking to your program directors is a really good way to advocate. If you think that your program is, maybe isn't well equipped to put up sandbags, but maybe you can offer some sort of mental health counseling for people who are sheltering at a school, or maybe you don't feel comfortable providing emotional support, but that you and your core members could be mucking and gutting houses or something like that. Just think about it. And like I said, if you think of anything that seems relevant, please talk to your program directors and let them know that you think this is useful and could be helpful for future AmeriCorps members in your program.
Yeah, so like the Baptist group that I was talking about, if you're really interested in the kind of response training, hands-on things like that, that's a really good place to start. They do have some requirements. Oops, I forgot. I turned my screen off for a second. They do have some requirements that you have to meet, but they might have, they're interested in getting people. And that group, for example, they deploy outside of the state very often. And so there's different ways for you guys to get involved. And hopefully in this information that we're giving you today, you'll be able to find those resources that are available to you. Because we have 120 counties, it's hard for us to tell every single person this is exactly where you go. And so you kind of have to do a little legwork on your own. We're going to give you the general resources, and then you're going to have to drill down to what's relevant and important to you. So just to let you guys know, there is still some pandemic assistance that is available and some that has expired. Eviction relief, child tax credit, broadband assistance. I'm not sure if you guys are aware, but there is a COVID-19 funeral assistance. If you've had a family member who died due to COVID, you can go to this federal website and you can get up to $9,000 to help with funeral expenses that you incurred through the loss of a loved one. My understanding is it's a pretty simple process as processes go for what different from what you might expect from the federal government sometimes. My mother-in-law was able to go in, she filled out a form, she was mailed a check. It wasn't really very hard. She didn't have to have a lot of things to prove things. It was a relatively simple process for her, but it was very helpful to have that assistance. The student loan forgiveness has been, or not forgiveness, forbearance has been extended, I think, through August. So if you need information about that, these websites will help you through there. Some of the resources, so what I'll say about pandemic relief, a lot of the resources were sent to states, and then states sent them out to localities, or the state is in charge of them. Some of these have expired. Some of them are still ongoing. And it depends on your state. It depends on your locality. And so it doesn't hurt to check and see what resources are still available to you, because it could vary from location to location. So I don't want to say that all assistance is gone in Kentucky. There may be some counties that still have money left, that they're still trying to do eviction relief and things like that. And so, you want to go in and check out what you can find out for your individual needs. Some of the legislature has ended some programs, but some states still have resources that they're trying to get out. Holly put a reminder in the chat that the survey is there. Remember, if you complete the survey, you'll be in a drawing for some of the prizes that we have. And we will mail those out, or we'll contact you after we'll contact your program and say, hey, this member was with your program, they want a prize, we need to get them their prize, and we'll get that out to you. So be sure you fill out the survey using the link that Holly shared. Holly Dennis says that Louisville Metro is no longer accepting new applications for COVID rental assistance. However, if you have an incomplete application that you started before April 1st, you can still submit it. Thanks, Holly. That's great information. Let's see. All right. Next one. Some regional disaster considerations. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because we're going to run out of time probably. So as we said, disasters are local and we have different disasters in Kentucky. So one of the things that we talk about is we talked about planning and preparedness. If you live in Western Kentucky, your disaster plan should include potential for an earthquake. They say that this fault line will be, it's active currently, but there's not an active earthquake. So there is a possibility that at some point, Western Kentucky will be hit with an earthquake. And so your kit and your plan needs to include ideas or things about potential for earthquakes. There are some safety drills here on these links, recommendations that they have for how to prepare. And then this also, the Central United States Earthquake Preparedness Project has some really great resources on preparedness with respect to earthquakes. Counties that would be affected by the earthquake, these are your critical counties, meaning you're likely to have the worst damage, and then high, obviously, and then moderate. Everybody else is low. This map is a little bit easier to kind of tell what area you're in. And so with 120 counties, it's really hard to discuss that, but you can use this map to kind of help you understand what area you're in and what your risk is. Basic safety earthquake drills, pretty simple. Get down, cover yourself, hold on. This can apply for a lot of disasters, really, but this is what they tell you to do when there's an earthquake. For those of you who live in this area, in these 10 counties, we talked about the chemical stockpile of weapons that are at Bluegrass Army Depot. And this is the counties that could be affected were there to be an issue there. And so your plan, if you live in these counties, needs to include what you're going to do if there is a release of these chemicals. And so the preparedness plans, all 10 counties that are shown here are part of the emergency preparedness program, the CSEP. And if you're in the green area, that's the Bluegrass Army Depot. And then the pink is the immediate response zone. And then the yellow is the protective action zone. And so you may still be at risk, but not as high risk as you would be if you were in the pink area. And so when you're making your plan and you're making your kits, for example, and you live in Madison County, your kit should include things to cover your home. So if there's a chemical release, you're not going to leave your home. You're going to stay in it. You want to turn off your air vents. You don't want your air conditioning running. You want to seal up your windows and your doors. And so prior to a disaster, you get plastic sheeting. You cut it out to fit the size of your windows, make it a couple of inches wider so that it covers the whole window or the door, and duct tape. And you're going to duct tape that up. And so your kit should have pre-cut plastic sheeting with rolls of duct tape so that you can seal up your windows and doors in the event of a chemical release. And then there's some other things that you would need. And so just an FYI, if you live in or near Lexington and are interested, I don't have all the details yet, but on May 25th, Lexington is hosting a CSEP practice to check their response for sheltering. So basically Lexington is one of the places that people can come to if they are affected, and they can find shelter here in Lexington. And so they do sheltering exercises, and they're looking for volunteers. And so if you want to do that on May 25th, right here in the right-hand corner, Ted, if you would copy that link. Shelley Bendel is the person that you would contact in Lexington if you're interested in being a part of this exercise. And it's basically that you would be a victim and you are going to have a scenario, and then they're going to try to figure out how they're going to help you. And so they're looking for volunteers if you're interested in that. I'm flying by these because we're running out of time. And so basically the CSEP in action is all of these counties have worked together to make a plan and be prepared. So each county has things that they do in an instance where there might be evacuees, what to do with exposures, things like that. And so if you live in this county, I'm sure that if you went to the Madison County website, you would probably find information about the CSEP and what you can do in your household. Flooding is probably the 're 1 issue that we have in Kentucky. And so your kit needs to be prepared and your plan needs to be written based on potential for flooding. Part of the reason we're so prone to flooding here is because we're surrounded by rivers. You know, we've got the Ohio, the Mississippi, and then the Tug Fork. And then, as you can see from this map, a ton of rivers inside, not to mention large bodies of water like Lake Barkley and Kentucky Lake and Lake Cumberland. And so there's a lot of water in Kentucky. And so when it rains, depending on the intensity and the duration, you know, we could have a large amount of rain over a short time, you get flash flooding. Smaller amounts is when the soil is already saturated, it creates other problems. And then our topography, just simply, we're hilly. So, you know, we've got a lot of valleys and water gets down in there, and getting it out takes a while. You know, depending on your area, you might have steep slopes and little vegetation. And so these are some of the reasons why Kentucky floods a lot. And so your plan needs to include what to do. And so this slide discusses how to prepare or mitigate your risk for flooding. And so I think somehow I've gotten sorry for the scribbling. I don't know how that's happening. I apologize. But the ready.gov tells you how to prepare for floods. And then we would strongly encourage that if you live in an area that's prone to flooding, that you try to purchase flood insurance. If you're out and about and there's flash flooding and you see water, do not go in it. Just because it looks like it's fine doesn't mean it's fine. You don't know what's under the water. You don't know how deep it actually is. You don't know how fast it's actually moving. It may not look like it's moving, but it could be moving. And even if it's not moving, there could be things under it that are moving. There's a debris. There's a potential for a lot of debris. There's sewage in that water potentially. And so it's never a good idea to drive into water. Even if you think, oh, I've got this big vehicle, I'm fine, don't do it. One of the things that I'll tell you is that we have family that lives in Houston, and when they had flooding in Houston, people were getting around in boats because the roads were so flooded. People's cars had propeller scratches on them from the water got so high that when they were driving in their boats or riding in their boats, they were scraping the top of people's cars. And so you have no idea what's under that water. And so in addition to the fact that it may or may not be moving, it could have sewage in it, and it could have debris, and those things are risky. And so please never drive into a flood. Also, just a FYI, if you do the National Flood Insurance Program, policyholders are eligible to receive up to $1,000 to get avoidance supplies like tarps and sandbags and things like that. And so these resources will give you those, or these links will provide you those resources. Let's see. Trying to make sure that, okay. And then tornadoes. We all know tornadoes are a thing here in Kentucky. You know, people's West Liberty and Western Kentucky tornadoes, those were tornadoes that everybody said those kinds of things don't happen. You can't have a tornado in a valley. Well, West Liberty proves you can, okay? We don't get tornadoes in December. Western Kentucky proves you can. They can happen anytime, anywhere. And so you really have to be prepared for tornadoes no matter where you live, because just when you think they can't, they will, or they do. There's two different resources here. There's the Kentucky Emergency Management Tornado Safety link, and then there's the ready.gov tornadoes link. And all of these are about making plans and practicing and what to do in the event of tornadoes. All right. We're a little bit over time and we are done. So that is all that we have for you today. We are again going to make the presentation available. Please make sure that you visit these links, decide what you want, what your interest is, what you want to do for your family, your neighbors, and then say to yourself, okay, I'm going to go to this ready.gov website and I'm going to look at these types of resources because this is where my interest is, or this is what I want to do for my family, or this is what I want to do as an AmeriCorps member. And so decide for yourself and then find the appropriate resources based on what we've given you. The other thing that I will remind you of is no matter what you do with your plan and your kit, practice it, update it, and don't just do it once and then never look in on it again. Trying to think if there's anything else. We don't forget to complete the survey. It is in the chat. When you complete the survey, your name will be put into a drawing for some weather radios. I have my friend at CERT trying to, she's going to get me a couple of weather radios. She may get me a couple of other, she's looking to see what other disaster supplies she might have that she could give me. But we may also, one or two of the prizes we give away could be Serve Kentucky AmeriCorps vests. So I've got a few vests. I'm going to got a few Kentucky AmeriCorps vests that we might give away. So please fill out the survey. Does anybody have any questions before we wrap up? You can put them in the chat or you can just start talking. I'm going to stop sharing here. Holly's also reminding us that we have our end of year training on Wednesday, May 4th. Registration will be opening in the next day or two. We didn't want to have too many conference registrations out there. So be on the lookout for a registration for our May 4th end of year event, which is going to be about life after AmeriCorps. And so we'd love to have you guys join us for that. It will be a virtual event. Just also, if you are a returning member and you'll be coming back, we will be having launch in October. Is it third or fourth week of October? I can't remember off the top of my head. That will be an in-person event at EKU. We'd love to have you guys join us for that if you're going to be serving another term. All right. So that's all we have for today. If you don't have any questions, you're free to go. If you have questions, we will be sharing the chat and